Good morning and happy All Hallows Eve weekend. I see that no one chose to dress up today, confuse the spirits, so we know who you all are and thank you for coming. My name is Annette Lovell. I am your worship associate this morning, bringing you the service with the Reverend Kevin Carson and our media tech, Vic Allen. We want to welcome you to a place of seekers and believers, and lovers of truth. But what truth depends on you. We don't believe in being told what creeds to accept, but we do covenant to treat each other with honor and respect, to treat the world and all that's in it as an extension of ourselves. We believe in constantly learning and growing and caring for one another. So I'm going to go a little out of the order from your order of service, but let's read our covenant together that is in your order of service. It is what we strive to do as a congregation. So read with me. Love is the spirit of this community and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We always like to start our time together with a few announcements. There's not that many this week. First of all, if you are joining us online, I like to say sign into the chat box. Let us know who's there, and if you want to share a joy or a concern today, please type it in the chat box. Also a reminder, we also have, for joys and concerns, we have slips of paper in the back that Kat has, the back of the sanctuary. You can fill out joys or concerns that we will share later in the service. Our pledge drive is wrapping up at the end of the month. That means now. If you haven't turned in your pledge cards, please do so. Every penny is so important to go towards the work of this congregation. The women's group is meeting on this upcoming Friday, November 3rd at 5:30 at Victoria McDonald's home. This is a potluck event, and all who identify as female or non-binary are welcome to come and join. Let's see, Kat is going to be gone next week, so we do need someone to volunteer for coffee hour next Sunday. So if that's something that you could help with, please step forward. Let's see, Karen Schaefer says that she has the open initiative with her for signature for a petition for the primaries. So if you are, if you want more information on that, please talk to Karen. You want to raise your hand? She's right there. Are there any other announcements? Very good. Remember to turn off your cell phone so we don't have that lovely interruption later in the service. And let us prepare for worship with a few moments to just settle in, calm our hearts and our minds and our breathing. Let's go of all of your unreachable expectations placed by others or by yourself. Sit and listen to your breath. Let go of shame and guilt and open yourself to the possibility of forgiveness and love. Sit and feel your breath. Let go of the mistakes you may have made yesterday. Let go of the things that you might dread for next week. Just sit, be here, be in this moment. Take the time to breathe deeply and consciously, and I will ring the peace bowl 3 times. The chalice lighting I chose today is by Sophia Lyons Faw. She wrote, "We gather in reverence before the wonder of life, the wonder of this moment, the wonder of being together, so close yet so apart, each hidden in our own secret chamber, each listening, each trying to speak, yet none fully understanding, none fully understood. We gather in reverence before all intangible things. The eyes see not, nor ears can detect, the hands can never touch, that space cannot hold, and time cannot measure."
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem Fall Leaves Fall by Emily Bronte. Fall leaves fall, die, flowers away, lengthen night and shorten day. Every leaf speaks bliss to me, fluttering from the autumn tree. I shall smile when wreaths of snow blossom where the rose should grow. I shall sing when night's decay ushers in a drearier day. I invite you now to join in singing our opening hymn. Please rise and body your spirit for number 15, The Lone Wild Bird.
The lone wild bird in lofty flight is still with thee, nor leaves thy sight, and I am thine, I rest in thee, Great Spirit, come and rest in me. The ends of earth are in thy hand, the seas dark, deep, and far off land, and I am thine, I rest in thee. Great Spirit, come and rest in me.
Good morning. Today I bring you a ghost story. It is titled Ghost Cat by Eve Bunting and illustrated by Kevin Barry. I'm a cat, a ghost cat. My name is Sailor Boy. You need to come do this. I need you to read. I live in the Port Carrick Lighthouse with my friend, Miss Maggie McCullen. She has been the lighthouse keeper for many years. I was her ordinary cat once, but when I passed away, I made my decision not to leave. So here I am. Yes, I do.
Substitute reader Marty's voices. The people in Port Carrick are proud of Miss Maggie. She keeps that big light going, they say. Never misses a night. Without her, there'd be boats smashed to pieces on the rocks. You can't count the lives Miss Maggie and her light have saved. Boats often pass close to the lighthouse and sound their horns to thank her. The people of Port Carrick murmur, but it's a terrible, lonely life she lives out there, all by herself in that lighthouse. They don't know about me, Sailor Boy. I can be visible or invisible, whichever and whenever I choose. It's fun. I like daytimes in the lighthouse. But I like night times more, when the sun sets red on the horizon and dusk drapes itself over the ocean. Our duties begin. Miss Maggie and I climb the 50 steps round and round and round to the lighthouse tower. She does all she needs to do to start the big beacon so that it shines its warning across the dark ocean. I watch. I know it all by heart. Miss Maggie pets me. You could run this lighthouse by yourself, Sailor Boy. You're one smart cat. I know. Now and then we have visitors who pay to see the lighthouse. Imagine, I make myself invisible and tease them with the ghostly purrs or a little scratch at the ankle. Sometimes I even tug on a shoelace till it comes loose, or drag a tissue out of an open purse. Such fun to watch their faces. If Miss Maggie sees, she frowns at me, and I stop. But one day a man stepped on my ghost tail, and I let out a howl. The visitors stared all around, and someone said in a scared whisper, "What was that?" Miss Maggie calmed them. "Oh, sometimes a crow lands on top of the tower and screeches, and all was well again, except for my tail." Time passes. Visitors come and go. Today, Sissy Curry, a niece to Miss Maggie, has come for a visit. I thought she was a little foolish, for I could see a storm was brewing. She was to leave before dark, but it's dark already, and the wind is screaming and the sea is snarling at the rocks. Now she has to stay the night. I stay invisible. Sometimes visitors make too much of a fuss over me. "Sissy," Miss Maggie says, "it's time for me to go up and light the light." She leaves her niece at the kitchen fire with a cup of hot cocoa. Then she and I hurry up the steps to the tower, round and round and round. But catastrophe! In her haste, Miss Maggie trips on step 30 and can't get up. "It's my ankle," she groans. "It might be broken." "Sissy," she calls. "Sissy, come and help me. Sissy, Sissy." But her niece can't hear her through the shriek of the wind and the battering of the waves. I take a minute to comfort my friend, laying my face against hers. Then I become visible and leap down all the steps to fetch Sissy. "Oh my," she says, "I didn't know Aunt Maggie had a cat." She tries to pet me. I have to make her understand what has happened. I run to the steps and back, mewing as loudly as I can. Run and come back, run and come back. "Please, please, Sissy, listen to what I am telling you." At last she understands and follows me to the steps. Up, up, round and round. She sees Miss Maggie. "Oh, Aunt Maggie, hold on to me. I will try to get you down." But Miss Maggie gasps. "No, child, no. Go up and light the beacon. There are lives at stake. I don't know how, Sissy begins, but Miss Maggie's voice is now more forceful. Go, sailor boy. Sailor boy will show you the way. Your cat? Yes. I run ahead of her up the rest of the steps. The lighthouse seems to rock in the gusts of wind. The big beacon stands dark and still. I know what to do. I jump to where the matches are kept and then back to the wick, touching each with my paw back and forth, back and forth. Finally, Sissy understands. Hallelujah! She lights the wick and the great beacon comes to life, cutting through the dark night and shining out its warning. You're wonderful, Sissy tells me. I think she is too. We hurry down to see Miss Maggie. Is it lit, she asks. It is, Sissy says. Now we'll take care of you. In the kitchen, she wraps cold rags on Miss Maggie's ankle. The wind blasts around the walls and Sissy has to shout. Soon as the storm has passed, I'll go fetch Dr. Smith. And I can stay for a while and look after you and the light, now that your extraordinary cat has shown me how. But I don't see him. Where is he? Oh, he's around, Miss Maggie smiles at invisible me. Sometimes he just likes to disappear. I suppose maybe I am extraordinary, but who wants to be ordinary? The end. We will now sing our children out to the class. If you can follow Marty, if you'd like to go. Thanks.
As we leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness which we learn light our hearts till we return.
Our joys and concerns this morning. This lets us connect as a community and lets us know what's going on in each other's lives. For a concern from Victoria, for the suffering humans in Lewiston, Maine, and Palestine and Israelis in the Middle East. We have just a comment from Roby. One of the pictures here on the table is of her mother as a young woman. So she brought that in loving remembrance. We'll be talking more about the All Souls table here a little bit later. Kat has a joy. Her son and daughter-in-law are having a baby shower next Saturday, and she's going to be able to see her kids. Makes her very happy. Light a candle for your joy. And we want to welcome our visitors, Tana, Cameron, Ariel, Heather, and Mike. All visitors today, so welcome. We light a candle for you. Vic, are there any in the chat box? None. Okay, and we will light one more candle for those joys or concerns that we decide to not share today at this time.
I invite you now to close your eyes and enter a time of silence. Today, let us remember those we have loved who are no longer with us, those who live on in our hearts and memories. We bear witness to their lives and the roles they have played in ours. And during this quiet time, I invite you to say their names aloud if you like. Rachel, William, Amen. If you brought a photo and would like to add it to the altar and haven't done so already, you're welcome to come up during the rest of the service and just place it on our table as our remembrance. We also have cards if you want to just put the name if you forgot to bring a photo, or as someone said, this digital age, it's hard to get printed photos. Everybody's got digital photos these days. Our reading this morning is from the book The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Francis Weller. Grief and loss touch us all. When we gather in community for a grief ritual, the many tributaries of sorrow flow into the room. They swirl around us, touching everyone in the circle. We listen as the faces of loss are named: the death of a partner, a child, a marriage, the suicide of a parent or sibling, cancer and its rapacious consumption of life, a home lost through foreclosure, broken childhoods filled with alcoholism, violence, and neglect, the lingering scars of those who fought in wars, chronic illnesses that depress and debilitate, lives lost to addiction, and prevailing sorrow for our struggling world. As we come to the end of the sharing, there is a dawning recognition that this is our shared sorrow, the communal cup from which we all drink. It is ours to hold and gradually empty. We do this together as we enter the healing ground. For most of our time as a species, the primary association with grief has come through the death of someone we loved. Every culture has crafted rituals to attend to the wild mystery of death and the rainfall of sorrow that accompanies the disappearance of the beloved. Today, however, the sources of loss are multiple, and the complexity of addressing this tangled web of grief can at times feel overwhelming. These losses tumble into our lives continually. We sense the presence of loss from places both personal and communal, intimate and shared. What I have come to see is that much of the grief we carry is not personal. It doesn't arise from our histories or experiences. Rather, it circulates around us, coming to us from a wider expanse, arriving on unseen currents that touch our souls. These gates of grief reveal the interpenetrating reality of our time. We are not isolated cells, partitioned off from other cells. We have semi-permeable membranes that make possible an ongoing exchange with the great body of life. We register in our psyches, consciously or not, the fact of our shared sorrows. Learning to welcome, hold, and metabolize these sorrows is the work of a lifetime. An offering to support the mission of this church will now be given and gratefully received. It is a fact of life that anyone who survives early childhood and has the capacity to love and form attachments will inevitably experience loss and grief. For as Francis Weller writes, grief and love are sisters woven together from the beginning. Their kinship reminds us that there is no love that does not contain loss, and no loss that is not a reminder of the love we carry for what we once held close. Grief comes to us all, and the deeper we love, the deeper we grieve the loss of that beloved. Grief has been called the wild side of love because it can be harsh, unpredictable, and overwhelming. Grief can simmer just below the surface of our emotional stability and then boil up without warning when something triggers us. It can leave us with an incredible feeling of emptiness, like the gaping hole in the sculpture on the front of your order of service. And all of this is true whether our grief comes from the death of a loved one or one of the other so-called gates of grief that Weller described in our reading this morning. There are many sources of grief, many ways for grief to arrive unwelcomed in our lives and demand that we respond, no matter how much we resist or wish it were not so. I have thought about the mystery of death and struggled with grief more in the last 5.5 years since our daughter Rachel died than I have in the rest of my life combined. I have experienced other losses in my life, including the death of my father in 2003, but the complicated grief journey and pain that comes with the loss of a child, especially when it is sudden and unexpected, is a cruel experience I would not wish on anyone. If anyone hearing me has experienced such loss, you have my most heartfelt condolences and empathy. As most of you know, Marty and I lost our daughter Rachel, our only child, in January 2018 when she was in her senior year of high school. On the evening of January 2nd, the day school resumed after the Christmas break, she became ill with what appeared to be the flu. A few days later, we took her to an urgent care clinic where she was diagnosed and treated for strep throat. On the 12th, she seemed to be perking up a little. But on the evening of the 13th, she became unresponsive and was rushed to the local emergency room. She began having seizures in the ER and then was transported by a critical care ambulance to Rhode Island's main level 1 hospital. Despite the interventions of a host of doctors and nurses, she died in the emergency room at 1:52 a.m. on January 14th. From the CAT scans and the blood work, the doctors suspected she had developed acute leukemia. And a few days later, the medical examiner confirmed this diagnosis. In less than 2 weeks, Rachel went from being an apparently healthy teenager looking forward to graduation and starting college at the University of Maine, where she planned to study wildlife conservation biology, to dying from an undiagnosed acute illness. And for Marty and me and the many others who loved her, our grief journey began. Rachel's death was devastating for us, as I'm sure you can imagine. And the way it happened so suddenly and without warning made it hard to even understand on an intellectual level, never mind the emotional catastrophe. I had no idea that leukemia could develop so rapidly and steal a life so quickly. As I tried to make sense of the tragedy in the coming days and weeks, I spent many hours online learning everything I could about the disease and how poor the prognosis is for those like my daughter who developed a severe acute onset. Though I would certainly not wish more sorrow in the world, it was oddly comforting on some level to read the sad news articles about other teenagers who died suddenly from the same disease. Acute leukemia is a rare killer of young lives, but knowing Rachel's case was not some unique horror that struck our family. Helped me a little during those first months when my thoughts and feelings were a turbulent nightmare. In 1969, the Swiss-American psychiatrist Elisabeth Kubler-Ross published her now famous observations about the 5 stages of grief that everyone experiences, at least to some degree, in her best-selling book on death and dying. Her theory of the 5 stages of grief, also known as the Kubler-Ross model, has become widely known and popular despite some pushback in recent decades. She proposed that those who are experiencing grief go through 5 emotional states: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Each stage of the grief process is important and should be acknowledged, even if it is fleeting compared to others due to circumstances and the individual. It is unfortunate that the original model suggested that the stages of grief are linear, and so many people struggling with grief have latched on to the idea that each of the stages of grief are something to work through toward an end goal of achieving acceptance. If only that proved to be true. What has become apparent is that the process of grief is a never-ending journey, and that these emotional states can come and go in any sequence, sometimes in the span of a single day. We may bounce around multiple states on some days, and on other days, a single emotional state may consume us. When we make progress on our grief journey toward less pain and greater acceptance, it is more like an expanding spiral of revisited emotions. The other emotional states never really go away. No matter how well adjusted you may feel most days, you don't wake up one morning and say, finally, I have achieved acceptance. No more anger or depression for me. It will come back, probably when you least expect it. In my own grief journey, my early days were either overwhelmed by sorrow or anger, or consumed with meeting Rachel's last needs in a kind of numb state of acceptance, meeting with a funeral home to make arrangements, planning her celebration of life, and what seemed like an endless retelling of the story of her death. I felt like the spreader of darkness over the land each time I told people who knew and loved her what happened. We sat in the office of her high school and grieved with her principal and teachers. I spoke with my coworkers at Hasbro and my ministerial colleagues, and people at the several churches I had been serving part-time. Everyone was stunned by the suddenness of her death, and this seemed to make the news especially painful. I can only imagine that what I was feeling must be similar to losing a child in a car accident or a school shooting. In an age of social media, we only had to tell the parents of one of her best friends, and most of her school had heard the sad news by the end of that day. I was supposed to preach in Chester, Vermont on the day she died, and I had prepared them about my absence the night before when Rachel went to the ER. Rachel died on an early Sunday morning, and by the time worship services began, 4 churches in 3 New England states were already telling of the tragedy and lighting candles of sorrow and praying for our family. The congregation in Chester had gotten to know Rachel, and they simply sat and wept. Flowers and food began to arrive Monday morning and continued for days after, and letters of condolences poured in for weeks. Some days were better than others, but sometimes just getting out of bed seemed like a victory. Only a few hours after she died, we managed to somehow drive home from the hospital, and not knowing how to process my feelings, I sat down at the computer and started a journal, which I occasionally add to even these days. I remember it was still dark and extremely cold outside when we got home, appropriate for my wretched condition. For some reason, I included the date and time on that first entry, January 14, 2018, 5:45 a.m., and I have done so ever since. One of the things I wrote that morning was, "I am black inside and cannot imagine that light will ever return to the world. I hope and pray that our pain will diminish one day, but I can't imagine that right now." Now, more than 5.5 years later, the intensity of the pain has diminished, and I have many happy memories of her. But sometimes I run across a photo or story, even something very trivial, that evokes a combination of fondness and sorrow. And holidays can be very difficult. As one saying goes, may their memory one day bring a smile to your lips before it brings a tear to your eye. Grief and love truly are sisters, woven together from the beginning. In Jewish teaching, it is proper to tell someone in mourning, may their memory be a blessing. It is a way to acknowledge that we, the living, bear the memories of our lost loved ones, and by remembering them and speaking their names, we carry on their legacy. But in modern American society, we have trouble talking about death and grief and dealing with the complexity of our feelings. We live in a culture that emphasizes the pursuit of happiness to an extent that we try to ignore death until it inevitably lands at our feet. When we are struggling with grief, we may feel pressured to move on or get over it before we are ready or able to integrate our grief into the new normal of our lives. And this is especially true for men. We're not supposed to appear too emotional for very long, but to stoically suck it up and get back to normal. People can be very uncomfortable around the grief-stricken. I think it is important to be part of a supportive community during the darkest times of our lives. But many people are not so fortunate. And having a connection to a faith community is truly a blessing. When we are surrounded by people we trust and love, it can lighten the burden of sorrow we must bear, if only a little. As Weller writes in the reading, there is a dawning recognition that this is our shared sorrow, the communal cup from which we all drink. It is ours to hold and gradually empty. We do this together as we enter the healing ground. The love and support we felt in those first few weeks from family and friends, the congregations I served, my coworkers, Rachel's school, and even strangers in our community was so very important, and I will forever be grateful. When we held her celebration of life 3 weeks after her death, most of the details were taken care of by this network of support. The local florist refused to take payment for the large floral arrangement she made for the altar. The local newspaper featured stories about Rachel for weeks. And when we later planted a tree in her memory at her high school, the local nursery donated the tree and planted it for us. We had bought our Christmas tree at that nursery for several years, and they remembered her. When we returned to buy a Christmas tree in 2018 and 2019, they refused to charge us. Rachel's death, and more importantly, her life, touched so many other lives despite her young age. And part of the healing for me has been coming to the realization of just how large this legacy truly is. As in case in point, I have to share this story. 2 nights ago, when we hosted a group of students from the BYU Idaho Interfaith Leadership Society here at church to learn more about Unitarian Universalism, one of the young female students turned out to be a classmate of my daughter at Johnston Senior High School in Rhode Island. She was even friends with one of my daughter's best friends. She is 2 years older than Rachel, graduating in 2016, but she knew Rachel from her experience in the school chorus. Rachel was in the band in an a cappella group, and she was known in the music department for her enthusiasm, leadership, and musical talent. I am still stunned by this connection to my daughter years later and across the continent. It would seem miraculous if I believed in such things. For now, I have to accept it as a gift from the mysterious universe we inhabit. We often say it is a small world, but this is unbelievable. Francis Weller and others who have spent their careers working with grief from a spiritual perspective will tell you that confronting our grief is sacred, and it can even become a blessing in our lives. As Weller writes, coming home to grief is sacred work, a powerful practice that confirms what the indigenous soul knows and what spiritual traditions teach. We are connected to one another. Our fates are bound together in a mysterious but recognizable way. As a Unitarian Universalist minister and a grieving father, I admit I have not found comfort in the hope for some reunion with my daughter in the afterlife, though I can understand why many others do find hope and comfort from such beliefs. I do find considerable comfort in the idea that we are all connected in a mysterious but recognizable way. I'm also reminded of Mary Oliver's short poem, The Uses of Sorrow, which goes, "Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift." Rachel's death has taught me to grow more compassionate and empathetic over these last few years. But occasionally the old anger and other emotions still bubble up to the surface. And I suspect they always will. Like the poem says, it took me years to understand that this too was a gift. And some days my grief feels like anything but a gift. It is hard to think about what might have been, hard not to think about what might have been. And the sense of loss around her birthday and holidays is very poignant. I think of her passion for the earth and its creatures, her intention to study ecology and conservation, and to make a difference in the world. Weller calls one of his 5 gates of grief the sorrows of the world. And he suggests this is the gate through which we encounter the grief associated with things like climate change and the catastrophic loss of biodiversity. I think of how Rachel would have been touched by such grief for the world if she were alive and either working for conservation or still in grad school. She had such strong feelings about nature that her teachers talked about her passion. I'm also reminded of the Reverend Michael Dowd, who died recently, and one of the principles of what he described as living with a post-doom worldview, living meaningfully, compassionately, and courageously, no matter what. We will all encounter loss and grief. That much is certain. Learning to not only live with grief, but to embrace it as sacred work is the journey of a lifetime. As Joseph Campbell said, we must be willing to let go of the life we've planned so as to live the life that is waiting for us. There are so many resources available that can help us in this work, such as the practices Weller describes in his book. And there are support groups in almost any community. For those who've lost a child, for example, there is the national organization called the Compassionate Friends, which has a local chapter in Blackfoot. And of course, there are family and friends. And if you are hearing this, you have access to a supportive religious community as well. Even if it feels awkward to share our grief, it is important to reach out to others. So on this day when we remember those we have lost, let us acknowledge the wild side of love, the grief that we bear that is as deep as the love we shared. May their memory be a blessing. I invite you once again to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our closing hymn, number 6, Just as Long as I Have Breath.
Just as long as I have breath, I must answer yes to life. Though with pain I made my way, still with hope I meet each day. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to life. Just as long as vision lasts, I must answer yes to truth. In my dream and in my dark, always that elusive spark. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to truth. Just as long as my heart beats, I must answer yes to love. Disappointment pierced me through, still I kept on loving you. If they ask what I did best, tell them I said yes to love.
Our closing words are the poem Heavy by Mary Oliver. That time I thought I could not get any closer to grief without dying. I went closer, and I did not die. Surely God had his hand in this, as well as my friends. Still I was bent, and my laughter, as the poet said, was nowhere to be found. Then said my friend Daniel, brave even among lions, "It is not the weight you carry, but how you carry it. Books, bricks, grief. It's all in the way you embrace it, balance it, carry it when you cannot and would not put it down." So I went practicing. Have you noticed? Have you heard the laughter that comes now and again out of my startled mouth? How I linger to admire what the things of the world that are kind and maybe also troubled. Roses in the wind, the sea geese on the steep waves, a love to which there is no reply.
It is now time to extinguish our chalice. If you would wish, please join me with the recitation. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Be safe and be well.